I'm honored, delighted, and very happy to welcome Alexander Karp, who is the founder of Palantir, and Stefan Oschmann, who is the CEO and the chairman of the executive board of Merck. So you already met them during the starter, and this year, as you know, is the subject, the multiple futures of capitalism. Wir sprechen Deutsch und Englisch gemischt, weil wir heute Abend eine Gruppe sind. Eigentlich würde Alex und Stefan lieber Deutsch sprechen. Also es gibt Sequenzen, die wir in Deutsch machen, but in general we speak English, yeah? I think that's fine. So, I think everybody has heard of Palantir. But nevertheless, Palantir is still maybe an enigma. I'm sorry to say so. Even for me, who I tried to get prepared, Alex, it's not easy for a non-technical person to understand really what Palantir is doing and about what it is. In Germany lately, we have read many articles, and some of them were like, oh, what is happening, especially in Hessen, you know. People were very worried because you deal with big data and the analytic big data, right? But there's a very positive side, which is maybe often overlooked, that you prevent terrorism. So I gave now some keywords, and please tell us a little bit about Palantir. You founded it in 2003, so it's a young company, really. And I think it's a unique company, what you're doing, no?
I hope so. Yeah, so the idea, I guess maybe I'll explain a tiny bit of the history and then what we actually do. And then one of my critiques of myself, I'm a former reformed academic, so I have a tendency to focus on exactly the problems that no one's interested in and go into detail, especially there. But so interrupt me if I'm not providing something interesting. But we had an idea of taking a methodology for visualizing data that was used to stop cyber criminals at PayPal and bringing it into the intelligence community to stop terrorism. And like all normal businesses, you have a great idea. When you come in contact with the client, you realize that the idea is a total waste of time, and you're going to have to explain to your investors why the idea sucked and they're going to lose all their money. So we discovered that, in fact, what you need to work with intelligence services, you need to be able to rework the data so you have it in one place, but without moving the data. So we sell anti-terror software in the whole world, especially actually in Europe. That was our whole business until 5 years ago, but in 3 years ago we launched another product which has been very successful. And what the product does, if you're in the German context, you'll have read a lot of articles about how hard it is to protect data because the data is in different places. Our product brings the data together and then does it according to the most strictest laws in the world, which are European laws, so that you actually only see the data you're allowed to see. And the end result is, without violating cultural or societal norms, you can actually find terrorists much more efficiently, which has been the case all over the world and especially in Europe. And so that was our core business, and now we've rebuilt a product in the commercial sector where we do roughly the same thing, and it's applied to lots of industries. I guess the core idea of Palantir actually was not technical, it was philosophical. And the philosophical idea was Hegelian. In German philosophy, I have a PhD in what amounts to German philosophy. Für Deutsche war Sozialwissenschaft ist nicht das Gleiche. But this concept of Aufhebung, which doesn't really exist in the Anglo-American context, which is the idea of removing something, but etwas aufgehoben zu werden would be more in English like to make something disappear by using a different philosophical model. So you remove a contradiction, but it's not exactly the same as remove in the German context. Our idea was to remove the contradiction between fighting terrorism and preventing and protecting civil liberties or data protection. So typically you have to choose, people say you have to have no data protection or no civil liberties in order to fight terrorism. or you have lots of civil liberties and bombs are blowing up. And we believed you had to solve both problems at once. And you had to do that because otherwise you'd never have a consensus. And that, quite frankly, almost killed the business because our investors, who were largely American, said no one's going to pay for that. And we think it's stupid. And if you tell people you're interested in data protection, they'll think your product doesn't work. And then years later, we're the dominant platform in Northern Europe, which is something that is not known and we don't talk about publicly, but it's the dominant platform because it's very hard to actually protect data and find the terrorists. You can protect the data and not find the terrorists, or you can find the terrorists and not protect the data. That doesn't work in Northern Europe. It does work in other places. And that's basically our business. And we're in 40 countries, 2,000 people. Most of our revenue now is commercial. We have lots of partners. Yeah.
Thank you. Stefan, you work with Merck, also with Palantir, right? I read. Do you want to give us a little insight from your point of view?
When was it that we met, Alex? Maybe 3 years ago or so? And I'd been talking to a scientist who had told me that one could use the same mathematical or software approach to find terrorists for finding, let's say in a simplified way, finding cancer cells. And then one of my colleagues said, if we want to apply that logic, you need to talk to Palantir. They are the leaders in that area, and I said, okay, let's bring them in and let's have them make a pitch. That's what you do in a company. If you have a potential supplier, you ask them to make a pitch, and then the response from Palantir was, no. We first want to get to know you to see whether we will basically whether you will allow us. Whether we will allow you to be our customer. I'm exaggerating. Exaggerating slightly. So Alex and I got together, and somehow there was good chemistry, and we're now working in many different areas. We're working together in cancer research, and the product is slightly different than the product that Alex was just talking about, but it has a very similar logic. It's about finding patterns in or organizing data so that one can find patterns and establish a certain degree of causality in these data. We're working in supply chain, we're working in manufacturing, and I think you're working for quite a few German industrial clients. I think it's public domain that you're working for Airbus, that's correct. You're working for several German companies, and the interesting thing is that this whole technological revolution that has been pioneered in this government area is now basically applicable to almost anything. And then we're working on a very secret project. I did mention it in a Handelsblatt interview. Where we want to work together on sort of creating the Spotify of science. Spotify, most of you know Spotify. That's a system where musicians or music companies upload data, i.e. music, and anybody who wants to use it buys the data through a subscription. And we want to apply a similar logic to scientists who could upload their raw data into such a system. We're working with several partners, but it's too secret to mention it.
I think when I listen to both of you, I think we all should not be worried about data because technology is already a step further. No, I think it's too important what we lose if we go for protection of data, oder nicht?
Look, I would worry if I were the average person about what's happening with my data, under what conditions, who's seeing it. Is it going to totally destroy my private life? We live in a world, especially if you're living in Europe, where you actually have a fair degree of privacy to control your life and what you decide to disclose, both to society, to your employer, and in your personal area. And I do think that I think that a lot of these things come down to transparency and competence. Do you disclose what the rules are? Are the rules enforced? And can you be sure, without relying on a software engineer, that the rules are enforceable? And so if those conditions are met, then you have a massive opportunity. If they're not met, the way in which most of us in this room want to live is going to deteriorate. So I think you need to really, there's a legitimate side of the debate, which is that you have to get these things to work. There's the Luddite side of the debate, which is that we're going to throw out all technology that won't work anyway.
Okay, before you told me that you prefer working in countries where there's a lot more regulations for data protection, right? Your company can work.
It's an advantage for our business. We work, I mean, our business is global, and we, for example, have an office in the UAE, an office in Israel, an office in places, but as a purely business matter, it's massively advantageous for us the more strict the rules are, because it's actually very hard to build these things. You can't build a data integration engine after you know the rules. You have to build one in anticipation of what the rules could be. It's like building a language. And so we believe one of the caricatures of our business in Palo Alto is that we're both in bad and in good a little too German. So we spent years figuring out how we would build this, and then implementing. The marketing sucks, but the product is phenomenal. And so you have to actually spend years planning the philosophical system. But if you've done that, then it's very elastic. That would be the term we would use. It's very elastic, meaning if we do very well in Sweden, we do very well. Denmark is public knowledge. The whole country uses Palantir. Why does it use Palantir? In our competition for the contract for the whole country, at the end of the competition, we were the only company left. There was no other company. This is a true story. So we like that. I personally, but we like it also for more. I mean, the reason we started this was for moral reasons. I do think, to the topic of like, what does it mean to live in a capitalist society? Part of it has to mean that you have a right to have your own space where you don't have to disclose if you don't want certain aspects of your life.
Mm-hmm. Stefan, what do you think about it? Because big data is for your business very important, right? Because you have more insights about diseases and you can get better medication.
I had recently asked my HR department to look into where we have hired most people over the past couple of years, and it was data scientists. We have physicists, we have chemists, we have biochemists, pharmacists, medical doctors, but the biggest hiring wave we had for data scientists. So that tells you how important that is. We are dealing, just in a way, when you're talking about your government business, we're dealing with ultra sensitive data, patient data, genome data, and there is this move away from, and I think it's an important topic. It's away from data protection toward data sovereignty. And that means that the individual has the right and the technological possibility to decide where he or she wants to make the data available or not. And that's a technological question. I think that if you work in such extremely sensitive areas that we actually need stringent and effective regulation. The problem with regulation in some European countries, in some areas, is that it's stringent, but that it's not effective. And there we need to move.
Yeah, I like this idea of, like, obviously you want the individual to be able to weigh in. For example, me personally, you have this debate in America where people would rather live longer, as long as possible. I'd rather be able to have a great personal life and live less long. So that's my decision.
You know, if I say something like this, people tell me always, you're too young to judge.
But the thing is, you need a way of enforcing what the rule is to a third party and have transparency. And these things, although the technical means you work with commercial data and the technical means you work with are actually strikingly different, the requirement to be able to work with data at scale is obviously absolutely crucial, because this is how you make cancer research, other research work better, while simultaneously being able to show people that you're only working within the bounds of what they have agreed to.
Sorry. You said before the moral aspect of a business. Yeah, it's a big responsibility in your hands. You founded something, people trust you, that you run the company with according to certain rules. Yeah, people have to trust. This is a big problem for the average person these days with all the companies in Silicon Valley. And I think that's why people get frightened to share data. Should people be frightened, or how can we do this that we are safe, or that people have a safe feeling? And how can we ensure that the CEOs of these big companies really act to moral rules?
Can I interrupt for 1 second? I think people don't trust you. I mean, those people who know you trust you, but the people at sort of the general public doesn't trust you, and they don't trust me either. And trust is a big problem in today's society. When we talk about your actual topic, the future of capitalism, there is a U.S. company called Edelman, and they do a trust barometer, so-called trust barometer. And trust, they've been doing this for more than 40 years now. And trust in institutions, be it government, be it companies, be it roles like politicians, CEOs, or so, is at an all-time low. Interestingly, up until last year, the most trusted country in the world was Germany. Okay, that was in China. Wherever you go, Germany was the most trusted country in the world. The German trust in German has taken a nosedive, an absolute nosedive, because of Dieselgate. So trust is not there. If we look at absolute facts, if we look at societal development, we just had a discussion about inequality. I personally believe that outside of the US, inequality has not increased. It has actually, it has decreased. If we look at health, if we look at longevity, if we look at any sort of important parameter, and I keep quoting you, Justin, and Hans Rosling, you look at the facts, the world is a much better place than it ever was. There is less war, even when taking Syria into account. There is less murder, there is less crime, there is less terrorism even than ever before. But people don't trust the system. That, from my point of view, is the actual crisis of capitalism.
Do you agree?
Well, I mean, there's always, when I was an academic, I wrote my dissertation on an essay by Adorno, Jargon der Eigentlichkeit, which something translates the jargon of actuality. And of course, everything in the Frankfurter School was against Heidegger. It's an internal fight, but in any case, it was against a certain essay. But there was a very important point in this poetry from Adorno, which is that you always have to look at the truth behind salacious, invalid accusations. And so, like, what are some of the true reasons people don't trust institutions, or in this case, Silicon Valley? And I do think there's this one issue that Silicon Valley companies are not only tone deaf to, but it's like there's a question of who decides how society works, the society or Silicon Valley. So you have this primate des status. Is it Silicon Valley or is it sovereign nations? And I think one of the things that gets Silicon Valley companies, there are a lot of things that get Silicon Valley companies into trouble that I think are our fault, like, you know, that they go from nothing to something, but I do think there's this, it's never clear when you're talking to the large, especially consumer internet companies, do they believe they're subject to their own laws or to the laws of sovereign nations? And this is something that irritates people legitimately. And I think that is something that, like, that's a legitimate area where the companies have to change, because you have it in the anti-terror context where if you're they're the French intelligence service, and somebody goes on Facebook and is communicating with a French national in Syria, you then have to contact the FBI to get the data. Now, that is going to piss off all of France, legitimately. But, and so there's a lot of issues there, I think, that are legitimate. The things where I think we can help as companies are showing transparent competence to your partners. And obviously, in our case, it's hard because our partners tend to, even in the commercial area, we really don't talk, we're not going to talk about the actual work we're doing. But I do think finding better ways, for example, one of the things I was talking to you about, one of the reasons people don't trust the government is they don't see any output. One of the things I get to see, for example, in Europe that we can't talk about is I see every week, at least every week, I know about, and I don't know everything because I don't have the right classification to know it, but at least every week I know of a terror attack that some European authority has stopped, but no one else knows. I think if people actually knew how many terror attacks have been stopped in Europe just in this year, that would change people's idea of like, am I just paying taxes? Are they doing anything? What's going on? The people have this, creating transparency where things are working well, I think is something that we could do a better job of. But then I think there are things that are legitimate critiques, like, you know, why would European countries sign up for their whole media landscape getting destroyed and the people doing it pay no taxes? Like, that's not going to work out well as like creating trust. And so you have to have...
True. When, you know, can governments live without companies like you anymore? And, you know, also cybersecurity, Google, for example. I think the US needs Google for certain aspects in cybersecurity. For terrorism, they need Palantir. So how much is the state really independent any longer?
Well, again, it depends whether you think that the state, it's just like, I believe that there should be very strong, the company should have to follow the rule of the law of the land. But that actually puts us in, obviously, officially, every company's following. But do you have, for example, under the old leadership, you have a lot of companies that are clearly trying to build dominant platforms to control every aspect and would prefer a world where they're sovereign. And that isn't going to work. So you're going to have software companies and other companies providing. I mean, this was always the case. If you look at industrial development, pre-war Germany, post-war Germany, pre-war America, during the wars, Silicon Valley only started because, you know, the radar devices that were used in World War II were built in Silicon Valley. The way of listening in on the communication against Germany was built in Silicon Valley. The whole way in which people built stealth things, that was all built together with Silicon Valley engineers. Just like if you look at the way in which a lot of the industry in Northern Europe was built, there was a military application in the beginning. The question is who controls this, under what conditions, and do people believe there's a control? So no, you will always have private industry in these areas. You have to have it because we organize people differently than a government can. That's the main thing. It's not that we have more money, it's that we organize the work differently. It's very hard to do that. Just like it'd be very hard to do research. Like, you want to look, I meet his people doing research. These are people that are going to be unhappy working in a government institution, but they get specialized environment. But then it has to be clear that companies pay local taxes, that they follow local laws, that they understand they're going to have to do that they can't be circumvented.
That they have to understand, because at the moment they don't do it. I mean...
Yeah, they don't, and I mean, off the record, I've yelled at every single founder there, not for my sake, but for their sake. Because you will never communicate effectively to a country if you are clearly not sensitive to their culture, their norms, and you pay no taxes. That's a losing combination.
Stefan, what do you think?
Well, just from an enterprise point of view, any global company has a tax architecture, And for instance, my company pays most of the taxes in Germany. We have a system where we make sure that we pay a lot less taxes in the US. And it's only normal. There are some CEOs of large companies who can explain the world in all detail, who then go into the media and argue in favor of sort of data taxes or in favor of distinguishing between good profits and bad profits. I find that, I'm not an economist, but I find that extremely dangerous. There are possibilities to levy taxes also on technology companies, but that is more in indirect. I personally see that more in indirect taxes. Coming back to this question of trust and why are people so unhappy with capitalism? I recently had the opportunity to meet the French president twice, and I was extremely impressed with him. And he basically said what people are interested in is, I want to have some degree of security. People are currently in France, in Germany, and elsewhere, they're unhappy with security. And that has to do with concepts of migration and whatever. Secondly, they want to have good infrastructure. People are very unhappy with how infrastructure has developed. In the US, it's much worse than it is in Europe. People want to have jobs, simply. And if we look at this whole globalization story, in reality, we have a lot more wealth, we have a lot more jobs worldwide than not so long ago. But life has become more difficult for a person who had one or two assets. It was a white middle-class man with a US or an EU passport, without sort of advanced training. For this kind of person, life is tougher than it used to be before. For women, on average, it's not perfect, but for women, life has improved. For Chinese people, life has improved. For African people, despite what we believe, life has improved. The loser of globalization is the lower middle class white male. And that is the person who is mostly unhappy, apart from college students who are always unhappy with capitalism, but they've also, and professors, some sort of social science professors, but that has been the same 100 years ago. What is so new is that the middle class is so unhappy with what's going on. And there I see, for instance, I was extremely impressed by Macron, who said, I need to address exactly these issues. I need to create jobs in France. So I need to be business friendly. I have been fighting Le Pen. I've been winning the election against the populist. I know how to do that. We need jobs. And we need security. For instance, he's very well aware of your work, and I need to invest in infrastructure, and I need to change the French system, which is encrusted, but I need to maintain a social stability, security system. And for me, that is one of the big questions that we need to address. How can we enhance satisfaction with the system? Sorry for my long speech.
I think with the jobs, this is also a point you do. Now you say we need innovation to preserve jobs and create jobs, and not innovation which kills jobs, right?
Well, the fundamental beginning point of Palantir was that a human mind combined with a human computer outperforms a superior mind or a superior computer alone, which is a proven fact that people don't believe. So if you take a chess player with a 2,000 rating, which means you would lose every single time to a chess master, and you take a reasonable computer, you can beat the best chess person in the world, and you can beat the computer. So, like, the mind plus computer thing is a big part of what actually works. Distributions are interesting because whether it's terrorism or finding the best research or finding something, almost all the value is in the extreme, whether positive or negative. So in criminals, if you look for the average criminal, they're doing 99% of the crimes, but 99% of the damage is from the professional criminal and the professional terrorist. And 99% of the research that's valuable comes from the one research company with the one research. So this way of looking at the world is particularly valuable for preserving jobs. So if you take Airbus, for example, they have one of the things that makes Europe special is you have all these highly trained people. For example, at Airbus, there's 3,000 of them using our Palantir product to do preventive maintenance to predict which parts will fail. Now that's obviously good for them because they seem to be winning. They're doing very well against their main competition. But it's also very good for society because if you don't have a narrative, there's both the objective reality, which I agree with you completely on, and then there's the perception of the reality, which is, I think, part of the problem, at least if you look at the rise of the Trump voter, is it's not just reality, it's the perception that reality tomorrow will be worse than reality today. And so showing people how you can actually take the skilled workforce and make them skilled in a way that they're valuable tomorrow is super valuable. That's point one. Point two, I would say, is a larger European issue, is you have all these industries which are, I think there's a consensus, not just my consensus, that in industry, in research, in manufacturing, in drilling for oil, in pharmaceuticals, in infrastructure, they're among, if not the best organizations in the world. And the way they're organized, as most of you know, it starts in the duale Ausbildung and goes all the way through, and so it's a very unique system. But without software, they will really struggle to beat the Amazons and the Googles over time. So the combination of world-class industry and software is very powerful, which is one of the reasons I was eager to find a partner, because it's like you have a unique company, and really in this region, there are more companies like this than any other place in the world where people actually know what they're doing and are highly trained. Well, it's unique. But that is not enough in this world. You have to have a software component. So if you can get that company and their Fachkenntnisse into a software platform and extend it into an ecosystem, as we've done already with Airbus, and you can do it, you can end up really being dominant. And as we plan to do on our super secret project, you can actually maintain.
You cannot say dominant in Europe if there's lawyers in the room. Antitrust, antitrust.
You can win in a way that's permanent.
Yeah. Leading.
Das ist der Grund, weshalb ich nicht reden darf auf English. It's really funny. Now I know it's funny, but like the lawyers won't let me speak anywhere in English anymore. This is like, because I'm always saying things I'm not supposed to say, like, we want to build but apparently no one cares what I said. But in any case, you can build a position that's structurally advantageous to you and disadvantageous to people competing against you. And so, but again, this combination of you have something that's the mind and you have software writ large is exceedingly powerful, and it's powerful for the companies you work with, but it's also particularly important morally, because I don't think if you don't have a narrative about why the average person or the educated person or partially educated person is going to have a job tomorrow, I think you get populism in every country, and I think that's what you're seeing in the West, maybe for slightly different reasons. And it's dangerous, as any historical analysis should.
What worries you at the moment most? Is there something where you think there is a danger?
Well, I mean, democratic societies, the people I would vote for are not doing well. I mean, there's almost no one I would vote for you could call successful. I mean, so, I'm not saying everyone has to agree with me, but I think if we had a range of people that in private, we were to vote, and we had a range of people that we would never vote for in this room, the people we would never vote for are doing much better than they should. There'd be disagreement. I mean, I get in trouble in America for being very much on the side that we should allow everyone to speak. No, I think this political correctness thing in America is a terrible danger because you can no longer articulate ideas. But be that as it may, if we voted in this room, the distribution would probably be here and here, and the people we consider viable, I think they're not politically where they should be. I think that's kind of obvious, and then how do you change that? There's this trust issue. Once you lose trust, it's very hard to get it back. And then, of course, there's all these technical things that people always want to talk to me about, but they exacerbate these problems. If you look at any of the tech issues that people bring up, the reason why they're so pernicious is because the underlying structure is weak, in my view.
And I worry about, I don't know, I would very much agree with Alex that the political discourse is completely dominated on a global scale by, where that is possible, by either, although these old political categories don't really work anymore, but let me say by either right-wing or left-wing populists. And they totally dominate the political discourse, and that results in some of the factors that we see today. In reality, we have huge opportunities and we have huge problems to solve. We will live in a world of 11 billion people. That is an absolute fact. There will be 5 billion Asians, 4 billion Africans, and 2 billion the rest of the world. We need, and population will not grow beyond that, because actually there will never be more babies in this world than we have right now. So the growth will not continue, but these cohorts will come into, will carry through. We need to feed this world. We need to keep this world healthy. We need to somehow protect this planet. And if you look at, my personal concern is that if you look at the public discourse about technology in this field, it goes exactly in the wrong direction. And we would actually, I feel that we need more technology to solve these problems. Technology assessment has always failed. All the social scientists who work on technology assessment have done utterly wrong. It's like the people who have predicted that London will drown in horse manure. You all know this story. So I don't know, and I also feel that we had similar technological shifts in the past. If you look at the impact what the invention of the steam engine had. Prior to the invention of the steam engine, 90% of people in the UK were working in the rural spaces in agriculture, manual labor. The invention of the steam engine, within about 30, 40 years, totally revolutionized society. People lost their jobs. They went into big cities, and however, at that time we had much less transparency in society and much less participation. So such a revolution happening right now will have a much bigger impact. But I'm not sure whether it's bad. I just cannot predict it. If we look at the facts, China for me is the best example. Never ever in history have more people, in the history of entire mankind, have more people been lifted out of poverty compared to the past 40 years in China. We may like or dislike certain aspects of the Chinese system, but if you look at the facts, it is heroic what has been achieved. And another sort of concern that I have is all of this is going to happen anyway. It's going to happen in China. It's maybe going to happen in the US, I'm not so sure, but it will definitely happen in China, which is becoming one of the most innovative societies on earth, actually probably the most innovative society on earth, with advantages and disadvantages. And we sort of broil in our own broth, and we act as if we here in Germany or in Austria, as if we could really influence these trends. And that bothers me.
Alex, you want just to comment a little bit about the last point?
I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I think, yeah, I don't know. I agree with most of that.
We're both ex-Marxists.
You know what is amazing? You're both ex-Marxists. Now you're convinced by capitalism.
Well, I still run Palantir like a commune. So everybody except for the social part isn't quite as good, but everyone gets shares. You work all the time. You mostly like people except for the ones you don't like, and yeah, you're making.
In one moment we open for the floor. Just what is your vision for capitalism, or what would you wish for capitalism? How should it be?
I mean, I think it's very different in America and the U.S. And in Europe. In America, I think that the difference between the wealthy and the poor is morally borders on unacceptable, and the educational system, in my view, is a pre-training migration program to jail. So I think you really you have to reform that. You have 2% of America either in jail or on probation, and the level of literacy is astounding. And so you have to, like, that, if that's capitalism, I still am a Marxist. I don't think that actually works. On the other hand, you have massive innovation centers that in some ways exacerbate it, but so changing the class dynamic in America while maintaining the vitality, and I would like to see America stay more of an immigration magnet, especially at high-end immigration. I think that's under massive assault. So I think Europe is a different situation. I think Europe, the future of capitalism would be greatly helped if there was more understanding that new forms of capitalism are not only nice and needed, but they're of existential value for Western Europe, and they should be treated. Macron actually, I think, does this, but it's existentially necessary for Europe to have a real tech scene, to have entrepreneurs that build companies, accept failure. The capital will follow, but there has to be a real shift in the approach to that. So I think you'd want to import some of the positive things from Europe to America, and for here, I don't, except for Macron, I've never interacted with someone that really, as a politician, understands this isn't a nice to have, paint your car slightly more red and you learn another language which will make you even more impressive kind of thing. This is either you figure out how to do this, or the businesses here will just not be effective. And I think European culture and society is obviously one of the precious goods of the world. So more focus and more understanding. You're going to have to change rules. Like, I'll give you simple things. If you build a company, I'm very in favor of labor regulation for working class people. I actually think the unions in Europe are impressive. But you cannot build a company with software engineers where you need a reason for firing them. Because, first of all, they don't need protection. They'll get a job. If I fire someone at Palantir, they laugh at me. You're like, you're an idiot. Who would fire me? I have a job. I have 5 jobs. I'm going to tell everyone you're the stupid person. In fact, there's some people at Palantir you try to fire, like, you're not firing me. You're not that stupid. So, like, the idea, but you need to be able to actually control who the founding team is. And a lot of that comes down to, I like working with the person. That's just a fact. You will never build a big company if the 15 people you start with are people you do not believe in. And For example, we had no financing. We only had financing because we had the #1 person at Stanford. And we fired him, and we have at Palantir today a no asshole policy. We fired him because he was a jerk. That's why we fired him. And if you cannot do that, you will not build a company from the beginning. And so but Europe isn't going to change. Just like it has to be an exit. We have to solve this problem. And I think those are big issues that have to be, without changing, in order to keep Europe the way, to keep the things that are very special about Europe, which I would say are quality of intellect, which is #1, the absolute quality of intellect and thought, and then the structure of society is unique in the world. So it's worth fighting for. But there has to be more of a fight. We're going to fight for this. And there's not enough of that.
Alex, thank you. Stefan, a short comment or?
My thinking, my business thinking was founded in the US, let's say in the 90s. And I came into Germany, back into Germany, into a 350-year-old family-owned company. And I was extremely shocked initially. And the owners would say, so, but what you do, what impact will that have on our workers? And I found that actually appalling initially. I've learned a lot from them, and I used to wholeheartedly disagree with what Alex has just said about the benefits of the European system. I have serious doubts about my prior convictions. Also, the fact that you work in a system where there's a lot more accountability. The folks who did Lehman Brothers or so, all their wealth should have been taken away from them. That would happen in a system in which I work. What I think what lacks in Europe is just a little bit of Silicon Valley, those in Silicon Valley, i.e., risk taking, the availability of risk capital, a culture where failure is no problem. You start anew again, and where you have slightly less market entry barriers. For instance, in my business, we were just talking about that. The European Court of Justice taken the decision only two days ago on precision genome editing in agriculture. It's absolute nonsense what they did. So I would love to live in a Europe which maintains the strength that Alex has portrayed, but that opens up more to innovation.
Okay, great. Thank you both.